The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Yaron Brook Show on this Thursday night. All right. All right. Thanks for joining me tonight. Appreciate it. Thanks those of you who participated in Tuesday's match. It was a very successful show and raised a lot of money and got a lot of ideas out there and completed. I don't know if I completed, but at least for now completed the series on morality and its application in real life. I still want to do two shows in that regard, one on kind of the unity of the virtues and then one on the 7 deadly sins. I think we'll do the 7 deadly sins first. That should be a fun one. We've been talking too much about virtues. It's time to talk about sins. Sins are more fun to talk about. All right, so we'll no, they're not. We'll talk about that probably on Sunday. We'll probably do a show on sins. On Saturday, the show will be on Can One Be Optimistic? Today will be super pessimistic, and on Saturday will be semi-optimistic. All right, so so I will take you up. We'll talk about that on Saturday. All right, today we want to talk about authoritarianism, what it is. Is it here yet? Matt says, well, maybe it's already here. Is it already here? To some extent, sure. And whose authoritarian should we fear more? The left or the right? And we'll talk about what the left is and what the right is and what authoritarian looks like. Authoritarianism looks coming from the left and coming from the right, and whether the distinction makes any sense anymore. So yes, today, as Stephen says, it's time for some pessimism. Right? We've been optimistic. We talk about virtues. We talk about living a good life. It's time to hammer away at some pessimism. All right. Let's see. You can, of course, ask questions using the Super Chat. If you're on another platform, you want to ask a question, jump onto YouTube and ask it here. I don't follow the chat on Facebook or on Twitter. I only follow the chat on Facebook, and I only really answer questions that use Super Chat. So if you're interested in asking questions and participating in an active, vigorous chat, well, YouTube definitely has all of those characteristics. Of course, I give priority to the Super Chat questions that put a lot of dollars behind them. $20 and up gets priority. The more dollars you put, the sooner I answer your question. But I do try to get to all the questions that are being asked. Okay, let me start with I guess some good news. Because there's definitely this trend towards authoritarianism. You see that all over the United States, and the whole COVID phenomenon has brought this out of our mayors, of our governors, of the county executives. You see it all across the country. Counties going into lockdown, states going into lockdown, cities going into lockdown. You're seeing, the people who want to tell you what you can and cannot do, how you can and cannot live, what you shouldn't do, where you can and cannot eat your dinner. They're having a field day. They're having a field day. They've never been so powerful, and their decrees have never, in the United States of America, have never carried so much weight and been taken so seriously. So the good news on that front, just a little bit of good news before we continue into our dramatic pessimism. The good news on that front is that in Orange County, California, where I am right now, Orange County, California, one of the nicest places in California, and certainly a place that has a higher share of, I'd say, liberty-minded, freedom-minded individuals that maybe the rest of the state has. Well, in Orange County, California, much of the decrees in California are being ignored. You might know that in California now restaurants cannot serve food, indoor or outdoor. They could do takeout, but they cannot serve food indoor and outdoor. So we were at a restaurant Sunday night, one of our favorite restaurants right near where we live, and somebody asked the waiter, "So you're closing tomorrow?" And the waiter goes, "I don't think so. I think we might stay open." We don't know yet. We're still kind of debating it internally, but we think we might continue with outdoor dining and not close. So they're not going to do indoor dining, but outdoor dining. So I didn't know whether that was the case or not, but couldn't tell. But so yesterday we were out looking at furniture at the small, about half an hour away from where we live, and we noticed that, and we were ordering takeout from one of our favorite Orange County restaurants that really hasn't opened since March. It's been shut down since March, only takeout. But we noticed that around the corner, one of the restaurants was open. Actually, two of them. There was an oyster bar there that was open, indoor dining only. People sitting at the bar eating oysters. And then we noticed around the corner there was a restaurant there with indoor and outdoor dining. And we went and asked the guy, "Are you open?" And the guy said, Yep, we're open. And they offered to seat us indoors. We landed up, it was too noisy because of the music. We landed up sitting outdoors, ordered regular menu, not a lot of people there. When the meal ended, I thanked the waiter, thanked the people for keeping their restaurants open and sticking it to the man. And it was nice, had a nice meal. We are, my wife and I, are among those people that since COVID started who have eaten at restaurants throughout the entire time, indoor and outdoor. In Puerto Rico, indoor, and California, mostly outdoor, but have not given up our lives, have not slowed down in terms of that. Furniture stores were open, not exactly essential services, essential to whom, of course, and for what, but not exactly what the authoritarians consider essential services. They were open, and as are most of the stores around. They're empty, sad, really, really sad to see how empty the stores are, but they are open, which is nice. The salesmen seem a little desperate when you come in. I did notice in LA that if you want to go to a furniture store in LA, you have to make a reservation. They'll open it specially for you, and they'll only take 2 customers at a time. Not in Orange County. Orange County, everything was open. Everything was fine. Now, it is true that I think it's the Orange County sheriff has basically said he's not going to prosecute anybody for disobeying the stay-at-home rules and the lockdown rules. So we've got a sheriff who is not paying attention. We've got restaurants that are not paying attention. We've got stores that are not paying attention. There is some sense of liberty, of freedom, of leave us alone and get off our backs. We won't do what you tell us to do. Sense left in at least parts of California, at least in Orange County. So good for the people in Orange County, good for the restaurant owners, good for the people keeping their stores and their businesses open, good for the people prioritizing their own lives and their own well-being and their own financial well-being over what the dictates of the little authoritarians in Sacramento. So it's still horrific what's going on, but at least there are some people standing up against it. Yeah, Gail says the Riverside County in California also, sheriff has said he's not going to enforce these things. Pasadena in Los Angeles County, everything's open. They basically said, we're not going to abide by the county's regulation. We're opting out of the county for the purposes of COVID. I hear Beverly Hills, the city of Beverly Hills, is thinking of seceding from the county of Los Angeles because of the COVID restrictions. So you're seeing across Southern California, at least, I don't know what the situation is in the north, but at least in terms of Southern California, you're seeing resistance, or you're seeing people just ignoring it. I won't say that the roads are busy, because when they're busy in California, they're really busy. But it's not dead out there. So people are moving around, they are commuting, they are going out, they are doing stuff. It's not, business is not completely dead, although it is much slower. The only good thing about COVID is being traffic. But no, I'll take the traffic jams any day and not have to suffer through the ridiculousness and the agony and the suffering that some people are suffering from COVID. All right, don't forget to like the show. We don't have a challenge, but it helps the algorithm. So before you leave, don't forget to like the show. And those of you who might not be subscribers to the show, please subscribe if you see value in it. You'd like to be notified about future shows. Then subscribe, click the bell. You'll be notified about live shows and so on. Okay, so at least in California, we see some resistance. My guess is you'll see it across, across the country. You'll see it in different places, but the lockdowns are on, and these lockdowns are really. It really is horrific, the kind of power that we've discovered that our governors and our state authorities have. There's been a few lawsuits about this. There was one lawsuit in Pennsylvania where a federal appellate judge said that these lockdowns were unconstitutional, but it doesn't seem to have slowed anything down. I guess it's on appeal, and while it's on appeal, the lockdowns continue. But it is shocking that there are not as many lawsuits as you'd expect. There's not really many challenges. I think primarily because most legal scholars believe that states and governors and local authorities are within their constitutional rights to lock you down even though you're healthy. That the government somehow has the authority to shut down whole cities. Now, I can understand shutting down infected people. I understand the isolate. But the idea that you can tell a healthy person you cannot go out, or you cannot go to a restaurant, or you can tell a business person, no matter what you do, masks, temperature, you could demand a COVID test. I don't know. But no matter what you do, no matter what your requirements as a private business, we're shutting you down. We're shutting you down. Oh, one of the things I heard, which is perfect, right? This is perfect and fits in perfectly with the whole idea of egalitarianism and the whole attitude of egalitarianism. So one of my big hopes, but now it's dashed a little bit, one of my big hopes for the vaccines is that if you get vaccinated, you basically get a little card that says you're vaccinated. You can download it onto your phone or whatever, but you get some proof of vaccination. And that you can then use that proof of vaccination to travel, to go into countries that might have restrictions, to board an international flight, to do a bunch of things that you think vaccinations would free you of doing. Because if you're vaccinated, you're not going to get the disease, and you're not going to give it to other people. So there is a big debate right now about whether that is, quote, moral to do. Because the ethicists are arguing, what about the people who are not going to get vaccinated? There's going to be discrimination against them. And discrimination is wrong. What if and my neighbor, we both want to fly to Paris, and Paris demands that you be vaccinated, then only I can fly and he can't. Because I got vaccinated, he didn't. That's discriminatory. That's unjust. How? Or what if somebody can't get vaccinated because, I don't know, they got some pre-existing condition, or they got some sensitivity, or they've got some fear or whatever. So they legitimately cannot get vaccinated. Ooh, now they won't be able to fly to Paris. So in order to fix it, like all egalitarian fixes, the fix is always to penalize those of us who can travel, to penalize those of us who get the vaccination. Now, the fact is that if I don't get any benefit in terms of getting vaccinated, in terms of travel and things like that, I might not do it. I mean, what's the point? I mean, I'm not that worried about COVID for me. It's just the insanity. And what you see here is how ideas impact every little policy decision out there. Every little thing that's going on is impacted by ideas. And nothing is more vicious. There is no more vicious an idea. There is no more destructive an idea than the idea of egalitarianism, which, of course, is the idea that is prevalent on the left, is toyed with by some people on the right, and is, again, the most horrific idea I can think of, the most horrific idea in terms of the damage it does to human beings. Of course, it is a lead-in to authoritarianism of all types. Even though, I know libertarians who defend John Rawls's egalitarianism. So just horrible. All right. So let's talk a little bit about authoritarianism, left and right, the inclinations of both left and right towards authoritarianism, and the basis, if you will, for their authoritarianism. And here I'm going to talk about, primarily the far left and elements within the right. I'm not going to suggest that the entire left is authoritarian, because I don't think that's true. And I'm not going to suggest the entire right is authoritarian because I don't think that is true. But I do see both on the right and the left really, really dangerous trends. Now, first, before I get into big trouble, what do I mean by right and left? What I mean by right and left is the right and left as understood today by the popular culture. I'm not trying to redefine the terms. I'm not trying to save some old definition of right as pro-capitalist or pro-individual rights. I don't think that's helpful, because I think people associate the right with certain people, with certain trends, with certain movements, with certain ideas, and none of those ideas today are consistent or even in the direction of individual rights. And therefore, associating capitalism and individual rights with those people by putting them all under the tent of the right, I think that's unhelpful. So to me, left and right are just two variations of collectivism. There is the left form of collectivism, which is identified today with greater government involvement economically, an emphasis on on issues like race and issues like gender. So what some people call social issues, that with a left bias, abortion. And then there is the far left, which is focused on things like critical race theory and egalitarianism and issues like that. But all of them are united by the fact that they are collectivists, what I would say collectivists of the left. And what makes them of the left is their economics, their flirtation, and some of their commitment to socialism, and their collectivistic attitude towards many of these social issues. The right, I view as collectivist as well. So the right is also dominated by collectivism, but there's collectivism of a slightly different nature. On the right, on the left, you also get the, of course, very, very important. You get environmentalism. Environmentalism is an important feature of the collectivism of the left. And you can argue even of the religiosity of the left, because there's certainly an element of religion, strong element of religion in environmentalism. On the right, what you get is a collectivism that is much more focused on nationalism in the negative sense of the nation above the individual. A collectivism of religion, and here religion would be traditional religion, Christianity primarily. You get on the right also a collectivism of a type of socialism, but here it's more like fascism. It's more control of business, regulation of business, regulation and control of trade. And on social issues, you get control and regulation of human affairs, primarily here abortion and attitude towards gay marriage, and things like that. So to me, the spectrum is individualism versus collectivism. That's your line. I am on the individualist side. Everybody else pretty much is different places on the collectivist side. The left is on the socialist branch of the collectivist side, and the right is on the fascist branch of the collectivist side. But they're both collectivists. They just have, it's useful to differentiate them because they have different emphases that they place on their collectivism. One is nation, religion. The other is race, and the right has an element of race too, right? And the left is as economic, so-called justice, egalitarianism, and socialism. So both are collectivist, but they're two branches. So there's a difference between them. But it's not a fundamental difference. They're all collectivist. And if you think about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, with very few exceptions, they're collectivists. Some of them are collectivists of what I call the right, and some of them are collectivists of what I call the left. There is almost nobody who identifies themselves as a Democrat or Republican who is an advocate of individual rights, individualism in any meaningful sense. There are few people in the Republican Party who have flirted with that, particularly before Trump, in the pre-Trump era, who flirted with, even Ayn Rand, flirted with free markets, flirted with individualism. But most of those people are basically sold out during the Trump era. So there are some people in the Republican Party who are on closer to us, to me at least, on the individualism versus collectivism spectrum. Right? So Ryan says fascism is socialism. Yes, fascism is a form of socialism, but it's useful to differentiate. It's useful to differentiate owning the means of production versus controlling the means of production, regulating the means of production. It's useful to differentiate between socialism, which advocates for, doesn't live up to, but advocates for egalitarianism, and fascism that doesn't advocate for egalitarianism, advocates for certain people superiority over others. So, while, yes, you could lump them all together and say they're all the same in a sense that they're all collectivists. They all want to control the economy. In that sense, they're all socialists. But there is differences, and the differences are useful. Differences are useful. What I don't think is useful anymore is to identify the right with individual rights, because I don't think there's anybody on the right, if that's your criteria. Well, very few people on the right, if that's your criteria. Right? Ayn Rand said that fascism is a type of socialism, but I think it's more useful to differentiate them and put them all under the title of collectivism, even though it's true fascism is a type of socialism. All right? So that's the political spectrum. A line, individualism on one end, collectivism on the other, but collectivism splits. There's only one form of government that's individualist. That's capitalism. There are many forms of government that are collectivists. Anywhere from pure democracy to fascist authoritarianism to communist authoritarianism to all the different forms of socialism, and then further along the line, maybe closer to individualism, and all the different forms of the mixed economy. And then there are countries that have authoritarian governments, but relatively free markets. They're countries that have relatively, democracies, but a lot of controls. Then they're countries that have both authoritarianism on every aspect of life. North Korea, Iran. So you get all the different variations of the collectivist, left, right, and all the variations of it. Then you get a line to the individualist, and in between you get all the different forms of mixed economy. And some of them will tilt left, some of them will tilt right, depending on what they emphasize and where they're focused. And capitalism is individualism. Capitalism is private ownership. Capitalism is private control. Capitalism is the government protects individual rights and otherwise leaves you free. And protect property rights in that context. Right? So, all of that, right? All of those variations exist. And it doesn't help to view them all as exactly the same, because there's variation. It doesn't help to say it's collectivist, it's all the same, because there actually is variation between them. Not fundamentally, philosophically, but in practice. And again, you've got to respect the way people out there think. If you, at least when it comes to these kind of distinctions, which I don't think are, the distinction between individualism and collectivism is fundamental, but the distinction between left and right is not worth fighting over. Right associated with individual rights, it's just a historical accident. It's not really real. Now, we know the extent to which the left is authoritarian. We see that in things like the cancel culture that we see in campuses, the denial of the ability of people to speak and to express themselves with unpopular to the left ideas. You see it in their demand for more and more and more state control over our lives. We see it in the demand for massive redistribution of wealth and control over our economy. You see it in the fact that while governors and mayors across the country are locking people down and so on, there's no question that the leftists are much more eager, quick, and much more aggressive about it. Not in all cases. If you look at Ohio, a Republican state with a Republican governor, the restrictions are pretty harsh in Ohio in terms of the lockdowns, and they have been since day one. So the left is horrifically authoritarian, and you could argue that the authoritarianism of the left is the ugliest form of authoritarianism, the meanest, nastiest form of authoritarianism, because it is driven by nihilism, which is the ultimate motivation, if you will, of egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is the ugliest of all and the most evil of all ideologies. It is what leads, and if you've heard my talk on inequality, or if you've read Dr. Peikoff's dim hypothesis, it's what leads to the killing fields of Cambodia. It what leads to the destruction of ability, of success. It's the whole philosophy of egalitarianism is to crush the able, to crush the successful, to crush the smart, the intelligent, the hardworking, any expression of virtue. Any expression of virtue is leveled, is crushed in order to reach this common lowest denominator. There's nothing more evil than that. I can't think of anything more evil in terms of a political agenda than that. Now, of course, they never admit it. They can't even admit to themselves because it's so ugly, it's so horrific, it's so evil. They can't, I don't believe they can even face it. But the implication of the ideas they hold are obvious, particularly in the 21st century, when we've seen the ideas applied over and over and over again. and again, most explicitly in terms of the egalitarian ideas, you saw it in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge. So the motivation is nihilism. The authoritarianism is done in the name of the most vile, evil ideology imaginable. The idea that we all should be the same, which is a basically basically a recipe for mass slaughter. And, obviously, a contradiction of metaphysical reality. That is reality. Reality is not, we're not all the same. That is metaphysically true. That is unquestionable. That is evident to anybody who has eyes and who can see the world and who knows anything about anybody. We're not the same. And yet the demand that we come to fight reality on that scale, on that level, is just despicable. And that's what they want. And of course, because we must all be the same, we must all think the same. We must all stand for the same things. It's not surprising that the left wants to silence us, or silence some of us. Because who are you to think differently than the group? Who are you to stand out? Who are you to have an opinion? Who are you to claim that you know the truth when we're all the same? We're all equal. You know nothing more than anybody else. So egalitarianism, at the end, this idea of equality applied to every aspect of life, has to demand that we stop thinking, we stop speaking. It has to demand that the First Amendment be thrown out. And that's what pressure on laws to have against hate speech, and because anything that is not part of that lowest common denominator is now hate speech. Anything you say that disagree with them offends them. An offense, being offended, is the same as being punched. It's the same as physical force being used against you. So you can see the authoritarian tendency among the far left, to be everywhere, to be endemic. The question with the left is can it win? Can authoritarianism of an egalitarian form of authoritarianism that advocates for egalitarianism, can an authoritarianism that advocates for critical race theory, right, which is not about, again, raising minorities up, it's about bringing the majority down, the successful down, to, again, the lowest possible common denominator? Is it possible for those ideas to unite America? Remember, authoritarianism has to unite people. Authoritarianism doesn't come about from a minority position, even though it might start as a minority position. It cannot survive if a significant majority of people don't believe in it. I mean, that'll lead to civil war, and it doesn't lead to unified authoritarian dictatorship. I mean, Hitler was a minority when he came to power and quickly solidified himself with the majority, or at least a large minority, enough to dominate the culture and the politics and the life of Germans. The same with communism in Russia. It's hard to tell, it's probably only a minority of people knew even what communism was. But once it was instituted, it had to, at least in some respect, dominate and be accepted by, in some form or another, a majority of the Russians, or a significant minority of them. Significant minority of them. So if you're going to be hugely unpopular, you're not going to be an authoritarian. I mean, one of the things about authoritarianism is we talk about their charisma, their ability to sway people, their ability to sway a culture. Well, on the ideas of egalitarianism, of critical race theory, of defund the police, of, you can make a list of of what the far left wants to achieve, others unifying. You know, in the dim hypothesis, what Leonard Peikoff, and again, my interpretation of dim hypothesis might not be the same as Leonard's. So, in other words, my interpretation might be wrong. I'm giving you to the best of my understanding, to the best of my knowledge. Leonard Peikoff is brilliant, and the dim hypothesis is not easy. But one of the things he notes is that what leads to sustained authoritarianism is an ideology that integrates a false integration, but integrates around a specific idea that people can see, understand, and integrate their lives around. Like religion, for example. It's a clear set of ideas with clear set of rules, and we can all accept those set of ideas, set of rules. We can motivate people to do that. That is possible. Does the left have such a set of ideas that can get them motivated? Now, Marxism was, but there are no Marxists today. The kind of Marxism of Marx with the utopian ideal and with rigid class systems and with a clear vision for the future and a clear message for everybody, it's just not there. Is critical race theory an idea that people can rally around and integrate around and become passionate about, and an authoritarian can run on and motivate people and they will grasp and understand it? No. Because most of the ideologies of the left, including critical race theory, including postmodernism more than anything, are ideologies of disintegration. They're ideologies of nihilism and a complete disintegration that's involved. If you think about critical race theory, and if you think about, how it manifests in reality, there's no there. There's no thing that we can, yes, some people have been discriminated against. We need to put down white people. We need to raise up, black people, but how and what and what's, there's nothing. And of course, it immediately places the majority of people as the people who are going to be oppressed for the sake of a minority. Now, majorities don't typically agree to that, not in explicit, unequivocal terms like that. It's fine to sacrifice the Jews, a minority, for the Aryan people, the majority. It's fine to sacrifice the aristocrats for the sake of the workers. It's a minority to the majority. To sacrifice a majority to a minority, wow. It's just not tenable. It's not tenable to the majority. And it's not a unifying message. It's a message that a lot of people say, yeah, to white fragility and all these things because they're virtue signaling and it feels good to say yes and it feels like it's a moral thing to do. When it came to action, they would all vote against it. Just like in California, they voted against affirmative action. Even though if you ask them all, they're all very leftist and all committed to Black Lives Matter. But when it comes to a vote, they're not going to vote themselves into an inferior position as a majority. There's just no exciting concept. Black Lives Matter is not a unifying concept. It's a concept that brings about guilt. It's a concept that can be used to manipulate people. But it's not a concept you can rise to authoritarian status as the dictator of the United States on. Americans will rebel against it. They will not accept it. And indeed, the only reason Biden won is because he distanced himself from a lot of those ideas. And the people who didn't, many of the senators and congressmen, lost because they didn't. The selection was pretty good for Republicans, other than at the top of the ticket. Because Americans will not accept the idea of defunding the police. And what is the integrating feature about that? What is the principle on which, other than disintegration, there is no unifying idea. There is no connection between the thing. We hate the police, so we defund them. We hate white people, so we put them down. I mean, there's an ideology there, but it is not an integrative, cohesive ideology. It's not an idea that can get people excited. It's not even Marxism, which had a coherent set of ideas, principles that led to death and destruction, but had a coherent set of ideas behind them. The left, the far left, has no cohesive ideas, no coherent ideas behind them. It's a jumble of disintegrated positions which lead to destruction and nihilism and nothing more. So yes, the left is authoritarian, and yes, the left will continue to apply authoritarian pressure on all of us. Now, there is one set of ideas on the left which I actually do think is integrated, which I actually do think can unify people and bring about a true authoritarian regime. And indeed, if they focus just on this, they'd be far more successful, I think, than their disintegrated nihilistic approach. And that is environmentalism. Environmentalism is a religion. It does have some kind of coherent set of ideas. There is one entity that we must all sacrifice for, the environment, nature, whatever you want to call it, Mother Earth. There is a moral code associated with it. There is a form of behavior associated with it. And while it leads to death and destruction, it is, a sense, a cohesive sum. Really evil. But it's framed, if you think about environmentalism, it's framed even as this is good for people. It's framed as clean air and clean water. It's framed as this is good for future generations. This is good for our utopian world in which we live off of solar energy and everybody's doing fantastic. While it demands sacrifice and would lead to death and destruction on a scale unimaginable if taken seriously. It's not framed as nihilism. Whereas egalitarianism is, explicitly, unequivocally. Critical race theory is, defund the police is nothing but instant destruction. So environmentalism is the one cohesive attitude. Nobody wanted Biden, somebody's comment in the chat, nobody wanted Biden to put us into the Paris Accord or pass a Green New Deal. We all, I think everybody here, opposes both of those. That wasn't the issue in the election, unfortunately. I wish it was. I wish that was the issue of the election. Oh, we got the racists on my chat. We haven't seen the racists in my chat in a long time. I guess authoritarianism of the left brings them all out. Right? Yes, and indeed, let's move to the right. The right, I believe, has very, well, I wouldn't say similar, wouldn't say as prevalent authoritarian tendencies. But I think they're far more powerful, far more palatable to American people, and far more real in terms of their ability to be applied in the world. And you're seeing that right now. I mean, to me, what is going on right now with Trump in this election is truly unbelievable. 17 states, or maybe it's 21, I can't remember, keeps changing, suing the 4 or 5 states in the Supreme Court in order to overturn this election. These are Republicans who have always been about state rights, have always been federalists, they've claimed. And now they want the Supreme Court to tell states how they must appoint, their representatives, how they must decide an election. They want to overturn an election because some states disagree with other states on how they've handled this particular election. The whole behavior of the Trump administration, as he predicted, as he said he would act, since the election, is nothing but the authoritarianism of the right manifesting itself. The amount of evidence brought forward suggesting systemic fraud in the election is zero. Every court that has heard these arguments, has thrown them out. Even Republicans in the judges, even judges appointed by Donald Trump. I mean, has there ever been in American history, I don't know the history well enough, a more aggressive ploy, a more aggressive conspiracy, if you will, to reverse an election and to take hold of power? Is there any more authoritarian an act than what is going on right now in trying to overturn this election? I don't know. But you see, the authoritarianism of the right ultimately, what makes it scary to me and why I view it as the bigger threat than the authoritarianism of the left is a number of things. One, it is focused on the worship of an individual. In this case, Trump, who knows what it'll be in the future. I mean, worship of an individual. How many people out there, worship this guy? Follow everything he says. Agree with everything he says. Accept everything he says. Act based on his commands. I mean, it's 40% voted, 47% voted for him. It's not 40% who love him like that, who admire him like that, who have shut down their minds in following him. But it's a significant number of people. A significant number of people. I don't know if it's 20% or 30%, but they're there. That is a large number of people who have become worshipers of a politician in ways that I don't think has ever really existed in the U.S. The second thing is the creeping nationalism on the right. Not the nationalism of a proper view of America first, which is American foreign policy should be focused on American interests, the protection of American lives and property, which is the proper view of America first. But a nationalism of America, by all means, America. Buy American, build in America. We are superior, not because of our ideas, but because we're Americans. It's the Tucker Carlson. I did that video analyzing Tucker Carlson where he says, America's great because we have great scenery. America's great because we're religious people and we know our place. That kind of nationalism. And worse. So that's one other way in which. And the third is religion. Religion is still alive and strong on the right. And in my view, these are much more integrating, much more palatable, things that are much more accessible and identifiable by the American people than anything else, than anything the left has to offer, other than environmentalism, and I'll get back to environmentalism. Religion is a unifying principle. We've seen dictatorships and authoritarian regimes throughout history based on religiosity. Nationalism is a unifying principle. Nationalism in the worst sense of the word. I have to answer this. So SC writes, your bias is showing, watch the state hearings, there's plenty of evidence. No, there isn't. One quote. The media is just gaslighting the public to repeat the line, there's no evidence. There is no evidence. The Texas case is significant. Trump will get 4 more years. So let me ask you this. I'm not going to argue this, but let me ask you this. If Trump does not get 4 more years, SC, will you come on the show, on the chat, and apologize? Will you come on the chat and admit you're wrong? If in the next few days, the Supreme Court, probably unanimously, but if not, by at least a 7-2 majority, probably maybe even 8-1, but I think most likely 9-0, throws this case out, will you come on the chat and apologize? Now, if Trump gets 4 more years, yes, I will actually come on this and say, wow, I was wrong in a big way. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of Trump on this one, I will come on this show and admit my errors and mistakes. Will you? Or will you come up with a new conspiracy theory? Maybe all the justices were paid off. Maybe there's, the World Economic Forum got to the Supreme Court. Or will you just say you were wrong? And it turns out that even by the standards of the Supreme Court, there's no evidence of systemic fraud in this election. I wonder. I have my suspicions. You come to the chat. I'm not going to have you on the show. You come to the chat and you say in January 21, you say, or January 20th, you come on the day of inauguration and you put in here, I'm sorry, Yaron was right, I was wrong. I have not seen a single Trump supporter yet who, a single one of you, Trump all in with Trump, on 100% Trump. I haven't seen one of you be willing to say you're wrong about Trump in any respect. All right. So I believe that religion, nationalism, are unifying elements. Now, I don't think Trump is the authoritarian we should fear. Because Trump is not an ideologue. Trump is not a man of ideals or ideas. Trump is not, in and of himself, a nationalist or a religionist. He plays on those themes. But he can only go so far because he's not a believer. Trump is a pragmatist. Trump is a hedonist. He's about Trump. So Trump will never be that dictator, will never be that authoritarian, is not going to lead in and of himself an authoritarian movement. It is the true believers in Trumpism, some of them here in the chat, and some of them in Congress, and some of them on TV. It is the true believers in the pretense of the Trump ideology, the nationalism, his support of every kind of religious agenda item. It is those people that scare me. It is that authoritarianism that I think can catch fire in this country. And I think if you find a charismatic, idealistic, nationalist, religionist, and I don't know if Josh Hawley has the charisma, but he certainly has the ideas of nationalism, of religiosity. It is the Josh Hawleys of the world that scare me, not the Trumps. I mean, Trump's setting the stage for them, but he is not them. It is Oren Cass, who has started a think tank to diminish the importance of free markets and to show a nationalist conservative movement how we can manage the economy. It is the conservative nationalists who I think play with fascism. Look, if the far left got into power, they are authoritarians. There's no question. They would be fascist, communist, and worse, if there is such a thing. I don't think they can ever win in America. They can't get power in America. There's no question. The left is uglier, more evil, more demented than the right. But they can't win. See, racism on the left is a racism that's pro a minority. It can't win. Racism on the right, which is a racism that's pro a majority, has the potential of winning. It has the majority on their side. So America, as Ayn Rand said, will never become Cuba. It will never become communist. Indeed, it will never go all the way on that part of the collectivistic scale that the left would like it to go. But it could very well go towards fascism of the right. And there is one way to unite both left and right, to establish a fascism that unites all Americans. So SC says, all people, just to get this election stuff out of the way, all people who have signed sworn affidavit all paid off, are they all frauds? Isn't that a conspiracy? Well, some clearly have been paid off. I mean, we know that, was it the Veritas or whatever, people coached and basically prompted some people to step forward and with claims that turned out to be wrong. Some people who sign affidavits are just wrong because they don't know and they viewed something that looked suspicious, but in 90% of the cases, it's not. So I'm sure a lot of the people who signed affidavits are just mistakenly wrong. And then other people are right in the sense that there was fraud. There always is fraud in every election. But we're talking about, to overturn an election like this, you're talking about systemic fraud. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of votes in a variety of states across the country. Yes, there was a story about this one guy. There was some evidence. There was evidence. I don't have it in front of me. Of, I think it was the Veritas Project, or is that the name of it? That prompted people to go ahead and claim fraud when there was none. But that's not the point. The point is, most people, I'm sure, are honest about it. They've been told that what they observed is really, really important. Most of them are wrong. And then the rest observed real fraud. And it exists. It's just not big enough, not systemic enough, not widespread enough to be systemic. And by the way, the conspiracy theory has to be on the people who claim it is. Again, because you have to claim that every court that has heard this is bought and paid for. That in Pennsylvania, it was one of the appellate courts was 3 judges, all Republican. All 3 were Republican. One of them was a Trump appointee. And unanimously, they all ruled, they threw it out, and it was amazing. I mean, you will see me in January, and you will see that you were wrong, and you will have to apologize. I mean, I doubt you will, but you should apologize. The scope of a conspiracy to take out the judges is just unbelievable. And the fact that attorney generals in 17 states, it just shows how tribal politics in America has become. It just shows how completely unmoored from reality Republicans have become. All right, let's see. So, as I said, I fear authoritarianism more from the right than the left. Not that the left's not authoritarian. In a sense, it's more authoritarian. But it's not an authoritarianism that can win. It's an authoritarianism of disintegration. It's an authoritarianism of nihilism. It's an authoritarian that cannot unite. It cannot integrate. It cannot present people with a unifying, exciting vision of the future. Whereas the right with religion, with nationalism, and even with racism. Can do that. One other. Somebody writes, being wrong doesn't call for an apology. No, it doesn't. But when you're wrong and obnoxious, when you're wrong and keep poking your finger in somebody's eye about it, then it does deserve an apology. And at the very least, when you're wrong, you should admit to having been wrong. But an apology is because of the attitude many of you have towards me, not because of the fact that you're wrong. It's because of your. Anyway, I'm not going to get into it. Yes, one way in which we can unify both left and right. And I've said this, I think I gave a talk about this when was it? I think it was 2018. No, it's got to be longer than that. But, I think it was anyway, about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And what I thought would unify left and right around a banner of authoritarianism, unify the nationalists, the religionists, and the leftists. I think the thing that will unify them and can unify them and make authoritarianism a reality in America, and I think you're starting to see it on the right, is a combination of religion, nationalism, and environmentalism. The time to really get scared, the time to really, the time when nationalism is basically just around the corner, is when you'll see the nationalists on the right adopt the language of the environmentalists of the left. About nature, they will use it differently. They will say, Wanda Freeman says environmentalism dying. No, it's not. It's not. And yes, it might subside, just like religion is not dying. They might subside because other things come to the forefront, but they will pop back in. And think about that God has left the environment in our, we are custodials of the environment, and that's what God's mission to us. That's how the religionists would bring it in. Or couldn't America lead the green revolution in the world and structured around some nationalist agenda? So if we can combine religion, nationalism, and environmentalism, that is the winning strategy for an authoritarian. And I can see that among these national conservatives. I can see them succumbing to the idea of environmentalism, particularly if it gets them more votes, particularly if they can structure the argument properly. So to me, the unity of left and right under the banner of nationalism and environmentalism is the real authoritarian nightmare to come. I mean, Jennifer says, is that what Tucker does? Yeah, I think Tucker, in a sense, does that. He unifies the left's hatred of finance, hatred of Wall Street, hatred of private equity, hatred of the rich, with the religiosity and the nationalism. And I could see Tucker becoming an environmentalist. I can see Tucker arguing that we should take global warming seriously. I can see Tucker arguing that America should lead in the battle against global warming. I can see Tucker argue that the right should take this issue away from the left and make it their own. And remember, the Nazis wrote a lot about nature and about the environment and about man's place. And I mean, fascism and environmentalism went historically hand in hand. So I don't think. Yeah, Tucker's hated by a lot of Trump supporters right now because, Tucker questions this, this whole election scam thing. I mean, good for Tucker. He's got enough head on his shoulders to realize that that is not like some of the people in the chat, that is a losing strategy. That supporting Trump on this one is not going to help his cause. Okay? But you will see a conservative case for type of Green New Deal. Oh, somebody says that already exists in American Magazine. New American Magazine has the conservative case for Green New Deal. Yeah, I'm not surprised. So I believe that authoritarianism will come to America around an integrating principle. The integrating principle most likely is a combination of nationalism and religion. It is also even more likely, or at least more likely to be successful, if they can find a way to integrate the principle around nationalism, religion, and environmentalism. And if you combine that with a charismatic fighter who will stand up to the left, like Trump did, but even more so and in more intelligent ways, I think America's ready. I think America is not far from giving a stamp of approval. Now, somewhat that is mitigated by the response here in Orange County and other places to the lockdowns. There's still a spirit of individualism. There's still a spirit of fight left in Americans. So maybe they will resist for longer. But there is a danger in the next 20 years that combination of factors leads us. While I hate Black Lives Matter and critical race theory and postmodernism and defund the police and all of that, I just don't think it's a governing ideology. I don't think they can win. I don't think they'll take over. I mean, at the edges, they may chip away at some stuff. I'm much more worried about Green New Deal because I think the right will support it ultimately. Particularly if, let's say, temperatures start rising or there's a few storms in bad places and bad times. He says, go to Texas. But Texas might not adopt the environmentalism, although I'm not sure it won't. But Texas will jump on the nationalism and the religion. I mean, don't go to Texas if you ever hope to get an abortion. So I view the right as more dangerous. And I view the right as revealed by Donald Trump as more dangerous. I view the right as set up by Donald Trump as more dangerous. Ed asks, Yaron, how about environmentalism? I just talked about environmentalism. And maybe he's behind. I mean, I think environmentalism, if it's merged into the right, and the right kind of right-wing politicians can do it, if it's merged into the right, it can become a ruling ideology, a dominant ideology. So that's my reasons for thinking that the right is more dangerous, to thinking that the right is more consistent with the M2, the misintegration that Leonard Peikoff identifies in the dim hypothesis. And that the left, far left, is much more reminiscent of the D2 in the dim hypothesis, in spite of the fact that it's authoritarian, in spite of the fact, all those things. D2 does not exclude authoritarianism, but does not have an integrating principle. And therefore cannot sustain power. Even if it gains it, it will lose it. And it disintegrates. Look at Portland. You've got a leftist mayor, and look at the Black Lives Matter in Portland. It's completely disintegrated. Now there are protests in Portland about gentrification. Tomorrow there'll be demonstrations in Portland about something else. There's no cohesive movement. There's just fragments. There's just opposition. We hate stuff. We hate everything. That's not a governing ideology. That's not an integrating ideology. That cannot bring sustained long-term power, dominance in a culture. Black Lives Matter. I just read an article today about Black Lives Matter. It's fragmenting. Everybody's turning against each other because it stands for nothing really. It just is motivated by hate. Hate for the system, hate for capitalism, hate for, whatever color skin is appropriate to hate at that point in time. It just stands for little groups, disintegrated groups, all, going after each other. Critical race theory is just set up to self-destruct. It is set up for everybody to hate everybody. You can't build a governing ideology around a set of ideas that basically motivate everybody to hate everybody. Intersectionality is the consequence of critical race theory. What's intersectionality? It's all these little groups, and who's more, more oppressed than the other group, and it splinters all the time. Everything is a splinter. Are you LGBTQ plus, and which one of those letters are you? Because they probably don't have discrimination at the same level. For example, if you're lesbian or homosexual, if you're homosexual right now, that's mainstream. But if you're trans, that's very oppressed. So even within the LGBTQ, some are more oppressed than others. So therefore, they're separate groups. It's a different grouping, right? And then what color skin are you, and how pure is that color skin? And are you female, or are you male, or are you one of 92 different genders? If there's anything that would suggest to you the complete and utter disintegration of the left, it's the fact that they believe that there are 90 genders. That is completely disintegrated. Again, cannot be a governing ideology. What's the unifying principle? What's the thing to get excited about? Agenda number 73? So you've got 92 genders, then you've got 93 ethnic groups, then you've got, there's no end to it. Complete disintegration. And a disintegrated philosophy cannot win. It can destroy. It can create havoc. It can be nasty for a long time, but it cannot win. It cannot gain and sustain political power. So I think the far left in that sense is impotent. It's incredibly dangerous and incredibly horrific and evil and destructive. But they can't win politically. I know that's hard for you guys, because I hate the left. I despise the left. I despise everything they stand for. I'm talking about particularly the far left, right? Everything. I mean, intersectionality is an evil idea. It's a horrific idea. And all of that, critical race theory, postmodernism, egalitarianism. I talked early on about egalitarianism, how evil it is. All right. I will get to questions, but I've got a lot. DGP, you're asking the same question twice. I will get to it. It's low on the list because I answer $20+ questions first. So I'm going to answer those questions. We've got a lot of questions. I'll answer those first, and then we will go to to the rest. Then we go to the rest of the Super Chat questions. So that is, let's see. All right, did the designers of welfare intend to take away people's self-esteem? They were that calculating and malevolent as to try and destroy the human spirit, or did they genuinely think they were helping to end human suffering? Well, I think it's probably neither. The people who designed the welfare state, convinced themselves that they were trying to help people, trying to end human suffering. But it could have been obvious to them. They evaded the fact that it was going to destroy people's self-esteem and destroy their lives as a consequence. So I don't want to let them off the hook by saying it had good intentions, because I don't think they really did, because I don't think the good intentions is what truly motivates them. It's what they convince themselves that motivates them. Now that's... Oh, so this is slightly different. Let me copy this one second. So, and it's hard to grasp that people are so self-deceptive, but if they weren't, it's very difficult for evil to face its own evil and to recognize its own evil, and they would go crazy. Ayn Rand has a passage about this, about how if they actually recognized what they were doing, they couldn't survive it. But I think they should have known, they could have known, in a sense they didn't know that this was what it was going to do. Now, certainly some of them viewed it as a pragmatic way to buy votes. Some of them probably did it because they thought it would grow the power of the state by creating people who were now dependent on the state. But I think that most of them believed, self-deception, we'll call it, that they were helping people. But it's self-deception. Is it immoral for people with deformities or disabilities to see prostitutes? Or what if you just haven't gotten laid in a while and just need some intimacy? Wow. All right, I didn't see that question coming. Sorry, I need to regroup. The question of seeing a prostitute is, I think tricky. So I think the second part of your question is revealing in this sense. Or what if you just haven't gotten laid in a while and just need some intimacy? Can you get intimacy from a prostitute? Is that what you're getting? Or are you faking reality? You're faking the intimacy. You're getting something. You certainly are getting pleasure, physical pleasure from the prostitutes. But are you actually getting intimacy? Or are you just evading and deceiving yourself for doing that? So I would be more sympathetic if you'd said something like, gotten laid in a while and just need some pleasure, sexual, physical pleasure. Okay. Right? I don't think it's necessarily true that seeing a prostitute is immoral. But I think for most people it is. Because for most people it involves the faking of reality. Now, it's not one of the biggest sins in the world that I can imagine. But it is going to diminish your ability to have sex with somebody that is truly intimate, where it's intimate because of the shared values, it's intimate because of the relationship, it's intimate because of the emotional connection. So I think it's self-defeating, it's bad for you if you're looking for intimacy there. But if you're just looking for pleasure, it's also not great, but I think it's less damaging. You're fooling yourselves less. You know what you're doing. Is it immoral for people with deformities and disabilities? No, I don't think so. Again, for the same reason. I think that because if they're viewing it as, I want to experience this form of pleasure, I recognize that I'm not going to get the intimacy, I'm not going to get the full, what sex can fully provide me, but I'm not going to get that anyway. I'm not going to get even the physical pleasure anyway. I don't think it's necessarily immoral. The immorality of it has a lot to do with why you're doing it and whether you're facing reality in terms of your own motivation for doing it. The more you're faking reality, the more you're not just fantasizing, but you're pretending that there is something that isn't, there's something there that isn't there, the more it's destructive to you and therefore immoral. 200 years from now, will we be living in an objectivist world, or will there be at least one country that fully implements objectivism properly? Yeah, I think so. I think in 200 years, we'll be living in some kind of objectivist world. I don't know if an objectivist world means one country, 5 countries, 20 countries, which country, I don't know. But yeah, I think objectivism will be certainly one of the competing governing ideologies in the world. So in 200 years, objectivism will be one of the competing governing ideologies in the world. It won't be dominant, but it will be a significant competitor. How can you live for yourself and not end up a narcissist? Well, because a narcissist is obsessed with himself, but is obsessed with how other people see him. And that's not living for yourself. somebody who really lives for himself. If you've read The Fountainhead is excellent here. Because in The Fountainhead, you can see that Howard Rourke is nowhere near a narcissist. But he's completely living for himself. But he doesn't care what other people think of him. That's exactly what it means to live for yourself. He doesn't care how he looks to other people. He cares how he is with himself and with reality. He cares about his own values. He cares about his own life. He cares about his own love. Narcissists' values are secondhand. Narcissists, it's all about other people. And it's all about superficiality. Narcissists are not traders. It's about themselves, but it's a self-destructive form. It's much more closer to lone wolf type form, but they're not complete lone wolves because they need other people's approval. They need other people's confirmation. They need other people's pat on the back. I mean, if you want to see what a narcissist looks like, I think Donald Trump is a good example. I really do. I mean, I think he is a narcissist. I think what motivates him is the perception of other people of him. He gets his pseudo self-esteem from others. He is not a trader. He is an exploiter. He has no principles. It's all about him in the most superficial sense. To live for yourself means to live. To live for yourself means to live. Which means to be guided by reason, to be guided by reason in choosing your values, to be guided by reason in choosing values that promote your life and ultimately your happiness. That is what a narcissist is. I mean, that's what a true self-interested person is and what a narcissist isn't. The exact opposite of that. Somebody's asking, who is Trump's witch doctor? Trump doesn't have one because he doesn't have an ideology. That's why I said Trump is not the dictator. Trump is not the authoritarian. Trump is not an Attila. He's too much of a pragmatist. Bannon is an intellectual, supporter, but he's not. Stephanie reminds me that Dr. Peikoff's new book came out today. Dr. Peikoff's book that is a edited version of his course on grammar, principles of grammar, came out today. So if ever you wanted to understand grammar and to understand how grammar is not arbitrary, why the rules of grammar are objective, and why the rules of grammar have a logic, they have a purpose, then this is the book. This is the book to read. Thank you, Gian. So I highly recommend Principles of Grammar by Dr. Peikoff. It came out today on a Kindle. It's available from Amazon. It was edited by Dr. Michael Berliner, who was my predecessor as CEO of the Ayn Rand Institute. So Mike is retired, but he was the executive director of the Ayn Rand Institute before me and a philosopher. He edited it. So it's great. You should definitely if you're interested. I mean, everybody should know grammar and know why grammar is what it is, and that's what this book provides you. All right, let's see. What do you think of the phrase "fake it until you become it"? I think it's horrible. I think that for the most part you never become it. Not if the thing that you're trying to become is rational. Not if the thing that you're trying to be is the right thing. Now, there is a sense in which it's not about faking it, because you should never fake something. You should always do it because you understand it. But there's a sense in which it's right, but not in the way it's meant. And I talked about this in the episode on pride last time. When you're learning something new, and it's not fully yet integrated. That is, you know it intellectually, but let's say emotionally it hasn't caught up. Act it. Don't let your emotions change that. So that's not faking it. That's doing it, but you're not fully committed to it because emotionally you're still being drawn away from it. Still do it in spite of that. And over time, make it second nature. And so if you do it over and over again, if you don't let your emotions dominate, if you follow through on what you think is right, then ultimately your emotions will catch up, and ultimately you'll become it in the sense of emotions and thinking being consistent. If you fake it, at least one person will know. Not God, you. And you will never be whole with yourself. And you will never become it because it'll always be fakery. So the only context is when you've got the split between your emotions because they haven't caught up yet and your new conclusions and your ideas, follow the ideas and let the emotions catch up. And that's when you become it, when you're completely integrated around it, mind and body, emotions and thinking. Why was Kant worse than Hume? Look, I mean, really, a question like that is for our philosopher friends, but this is my understanding. The difference is this. Kant had a unifying, systemic, integrated philosophy, all geared towards one agenda, the undermining of reason as a means of knowing reality, the world. With an ethic, therefore, that is guided by ultimately commandments, which is what categorical imperatives are, by commandments. And it's not, I saw some discussion about the Nazis weren't followers of Kant because the categorical imperatives prevented them from killing people, for example. But the whole point of Kant is not the content of the categorical imperatives. It's the existence of categorical imperatives. Because you can now, once you have categorical imperatives, in other words, commandments that are obvious, that are in a sense ingrained in you, that are part of who you are, then now we're just arguing about, okay, now the argument is what categorical imperatives do you have? And you're supposed to follow them with a sense of duty, so you don't need reason in order to adopt these duties, these categorical imperatives. So then it's just a matter of what we put in that container. So I think Kant does lead to the Nazis in a variety of different ways, which all articulated brilliantly in Leonard Peikoff's Ominous Parallels, which I highly recommend. Everybody should read Ominous Parallels because it's the definitive work linking ideas to history, ideas to history, how ideas shape history, how philosophy shapes history. And it's not, oh, I love Kant, therefore Kant influenced me. You could claim and you could speak and you could argue that you're an Ayn Rand fan, but if in the way you think even about Ayn Rand, you are being influenced by a culture dominated by Kant, then you might be a Kantian, even though you're arguing for Rand. So Kant influences the way you think about the world, both in ethics and in epistemology, which are the most important parts. And that can influence, you can claim to reject Kant and still be a Kantian, is my point. And Hegel is, of course, in a sense, a continuation of Kant. Now, yeah, he rejects certain ideas of Kant, but it's fundamental, the whole positioning of the philosophy is Kantian, and the only reason anybody would accept the gobbledygook nonsense that is Hegel is because Kant lays the foundation for it. So it's not that you're to have a philosophy influence you doesn't mean you're an advocate for that philosophy. Often you accept the philosophical premise either through other philosophers that have accepted it and integrated it and spun it in different directions, or you've just absorbed it from the culture. So Kant's worse than Hegel, the Hume, because Kant had a system. Hume was eclectic. He's really, really bad in epistemology. He's better in politics. He's very mixed in ethics, particularly mixed given his explicit ethics versus how he lived. He lived a pretty amazing life, from what I understand. So Hume is not a system builder. He's not a builder of a systematic philosophy with an agenda. And Kant indeed builds on Hume's skepticism. That's part of what he's addressing in his philosophy. And of course, you've also got Rousseau, who's another bad guy. So you've got Rousseau, you've got Hume, but the guy who puts it all together, that sets it all up, is Kant. All right, we'll have to do a show on Karl Popper because Karl Popper always pops up quite a bit. All right, the other day you mentioned creating our own outrage mobs. Can you elaborate on this plan and what form it should take? When did I say this? But, I don't remember saying it. I certainly don't have a plan. I think what objectivists should do is they should speak up. They should be outraged when people say outrageous things on both sides of the political aisles, right, left and right. And they should express that outrage. I mean, one of the problems with objectivism is that most objectivists are too timid, too quiet, not, particularly the knowledgeable ones, are not aggressive enough in promoting their ideas and attacking the ideas of their opponents in public, i.e., on social media, which is, I think, a great venue to do so. Our opponents are far more aggressive in terms of promoting their ideas. And again, you can do it properly, objectively, but you got to stand up for what you believe. So that's the sense in which I meant it. Not that I'm going to organize, groups to go out. I want that to happen organically. I want you to just speak up more. I want you to share more content. I want you to go out there and be much more proud of the fact that you are an objectivist or you have a particular view and that you are promoting that view and you are offended by some of these other views and why you're offended by those other views. For the interview with Toby, I don't remember saying that we should form our own outrage mobs. So I'm not sure what I was referring to, I guess. I do so many interviews and so many of these shows and talks. Hawley and other Republicans happy that MasterCard and Visa shut down dollars to Pornhub. Wow, I didn't know they shut down MasterCard and Visa. They say it's for child porn, but really they want to shut down what they call immoral behavior. Aren't they against big corps doing this? Aren't they against big corps doing this? Yeah, absolutely, you're right. I'm not sure who asked the question, but it's a great question. Yes, I mean, clearly Hawley doesn't want, and other religious conservatives don't want, YouTube and other companies to make decisions about who can post posts and what they can say on those posts. But they're very supportive of MasterCard and Visa deciding that certain things that people who use MasterCard and Visa use them for is immoral and they won't support it. So Visa and MasterCard canceled Pornhub and the Republicans are cheering. Right. I mean, I think it's horrible. Now, there's certain issues about Pornhub and other pornography platforms that I do think are being neglected. I mean, I find it quite shocking that there's no filter for kids, and maybe parents can just buy filters on the web and keep their kids away from it. But God, you just put Pornhub and bam, it's right there. There's no are you over 18? There's nothing. There's no barrier to everybody in your face all the time. So certainly if you have kids, you should put filters on your internet because I am all for sex, and I'm all for communicating to young the children about sex and its existence and where children really come from, where babies really come from, and as they grow older to communicating more and discussing more about sex and openness about sex. I'm much more worried about violence in games than I am about sex in games and things like that. But what you see on Pornhub is beyond just sex. I mean, it's the hardest of the hardest of the hardest core. And there should be some way to keep children away from that. But yes, Harley and those guys are hypocrites. And you saw this with Toby in my discussion with him, right? It's which values are you trying to protect? I'm fine with, protecting free speech as long as the speech is speech I agree with. But if it's speech I don't agree with, then I want the state involved. Would you accept a benevolent dictatorship? No, and I don't believe there is such a thing as a benevolent dictatorship. I don't know of one. You can have dictatorships that are benevolent in certain realms, but they're never benevolent in all realms. It's impossible. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I have no doubt that is true, and history has shown that over and over and over again, right? And so no, I don't want a dictatorship of one person or a dictatorship of the masses. I do not want a dictatorship. Scott says, you and Harley want to keep children off of Pornhub. Yeah, we do. But Harley wants to keep everybody off of Pornhub, if he can. Like, children don't use MasterCard and Visa on Pornhub. Adults do. And by the way, I'm sure Biden wants to keep children off of Pornhub. I'm sure Hillary Clinton, the evil Hillary Clinton, wants to keep children off of Pornhub. My guess is even AOC wants to keep children off of Pornhub. So what? Right? That isn't enough to make us allies on anything. I really liked what you said on your last show, that self-esteem doesn't come from someone else patting you on the back. Too many of us are looking for external validation rather than acting on our judgment. Absolutely. And if you think about our educational system is geared towards the idea that your self-esteem comes from people patting you on the back. So it's because you give ribbons to everybody. It's all about teachers are trained to constantly pat their students on their back. Constantly. And give ribbons and don't keep score in soccer games. And so, don't grade. Now there's a whole movement towards not grading because it hurts people's self-esteem. No, the opposite. Grading is what provides people with self-esteem. So it's absolutely only you can give yourself self-esteem. And you need to challenge yourself. So you need to have a grade. You need to have a standard by which you know you were successful. And it's success that leads to self-esteem. Thanks for discussing the definition of pragmatic a few shows ago. I don't understand why it is often defined as practical and illogical listed as an acronym, a synonym. I think it's because the people who are pragmatic would like you to believe that it's being practical. They don't want you to know, the more philosophical ones, they don't want you to know the true nature of what pragmatic means. Pragmatic is short-term, unprincipled thinking. Short-term, unprincipled lack of thinking. Because thinking by definition is, anyway. I feel that it's irresponsible to accept that multiple swing states aren't providing signature verification. It's irresponsible to accept that multiple swing states aren't providing signature verification and ballot image review to the challenges. That would help people accept whichever outcome. I don't know. Different states have different election laws. Some of these swing states are dominantly Republican states, like Georgia, and you'd think that they wouldn't do anything that would hurt their candidate. I don't think the governor of Georgia is anti-Trump, or the attorney general of Georgia is anti-Trump. I think they're anti-Trump now, but they weren't anti-Trump. I think that different states have different ways of doing this. I don't know enough about all the different voting regulations in all the different states and what is and what isn't. But That's why you had court challenges. That's why you have state Supreme Courts. That's why you have appellate courts, why you have federal courts. If there really is a problem, let's see what the courts decide. So far, the courts have been unanimous. I mean, unanimous in rejecting all of these claims. Now, I would like to see, for example, I think that when you vote, you should have ID verification. I think it should be, like in Puerto Rico, I had to show, I have literally a voter card, registration card with my picture on it that I had to show before I voted. Other states, I think even in California, you just show up, give your name, they find your name on a matched list, and you can go in and vote. You don't even have to show an ID. Now, we can say, and that's not just in swing states, that's across the board. Different states have different ways to regulate their elections. And it's not just swing states, it's different states. You might not like it, but that's how states have run it. And they've run it for a long time in different ways. And again, different states doing it differently. That's what federalism partially means. That's what it means not to have the federal government dictate to the states how they should do it. I'm a big believer in states having autonomy over things like election law. Unless they're excluding certain groups of people and violating their rights by doing so. Right? Explicitly excluding them. But yeah, I mean, Democrats for years have been arguing that Republicans in Republican states, some of them swing states like Georgia, have suppressed the vote purposefully in all kinds of gimmicks. And I think they're probably wrong in the sense that it's a big enough issue as to swing votes, but that's what they've been arguing. And Republicans are arguing that Democrats allow too many people to vote. And my guess is they're probably wrong. But there might be cases in which that's right. But that's the system we have. That's a system we had before this election. It's a system we have in next election. We're now going to have one standard across the entire country that dictates how elections are run. And that's why you have state laws that dictate these things. You have state Supreme Courts that interpret those laws, and you have a court system, you have a justice system that figures out whether these laws are being violated or not. And so far, unanimously, all the courts have basically ruled that this election was fine, or that there's no evidence of systemic fraud. Regarding pride, can you talk about the scene in Parasite with the pizza boxes and AOC defending her bartender job even though she has a college degree? I don't think the two are the same, but let me see. There's a scene in Parasite. Parasite, I did a movie review of Parasite. I think it's a very powerful movie. I think the theme is really bad. I disagree with, I guess, some other objectivists who viewed the theme as good. I think the theme is really, really bad. But there's generally, I don't think just in the pizza boxes, if you really think about it, throughout the movie, this issue of pride comes up. And the poor family has no pride in anything that they do, including the work that they do for the wealthy family. They're obviously undermining it constantly. They have no pride in the work they do. They're not trying to do a good job. They're not trying to be excellent. But that's concretized really, really well in this one scene where they're getting paid to assemble pizza boxes. They basically sit in their home assembling pizza boxes, and then the pizza company comes and gets it from them. And they've assembled a bunch of the pizza boxes wrong. I mean, this is just assembling pizza boxes. This is pretty easy stuff. And they get a whole batch of them wrong. And the pizza company doesn't want to pay them for it. And they get really upset. What do you mean you're not going to pay for it? We put time into this. Yeah, but you did it wrong. And that's, again, a lack of pride. But the lack of pride permeates everything about this family. The family doesn't have pride in anything, in their own life, in their own standing, in reality, in their jobs, in their work, in their careers, in anything. They are exploiters. Now, the movie has an opinion about why they're like this, but it clearly is not a positive movie about poverty in Korea. It's negative, and I can see why people can interpret that as a positive. But then you have to think about what the rich family stands for. But that's a whole other topic. And you can go back, and if you put your on-book movie review Parasite, you'll find it in YouTube. All right, great. Oh, we've already gone an hour 45 minutes. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the show today. Next show is not depressing. Next show is positive. It's going to be about how to be optimistic in spite of this. What facts in reality would lead one to be optimistic about the world, or how can one be optimistic about the future? And we'll talk about that. That'll be on Saturday. I'm not sure exactly the time yet, but I will. If you follow me on Twitter and if you follow YouTube, you will be informed on the exact time the show is going to be. So I'll see you on Saturday. We'll do a show on Saturday, a show on Sunday. Thank you for all the super chatters. Thank you for supporting the show and contributing. Thank you for everybody who liked the show. And don't forget, please, to like the show before you leave. We got a bunch of dislikes because of the discussion on authoritarianism on the right. But please, those of you who did like the show, please show that you like the show. It helps with the algorithm on YouTube. And of course, if you're not a subscriber to the show, please subscribe. Don't forget to click on that subscribe button. And if you click on the bell, you'll find out every time I go live, you will be notified. So thanks, everybody. And yes, don't forget to support the show on a monthly basis. That's the best way to support the show. I really, really, really appreciate it when you do that. You can do that on UronBrookShow.com/support or on Patreon, Subscribestar, Locals, and again, UronBrookShow.com/support. See you all on Saturday. Have a great